Something ancient may still be watching from the shadows. From chilling growls in frozen caves to twisted shapes hanging silently in trees, these true encounters will leave you questioning what really lives deep in the wilderness. Hikers vanish without warning. Officers are found arranged in patterns with no clear cause, and footprints too large to be human are left behind in snow and soil. Why do some survivors forget what happened, while others are never seen again? Watch the full video and decide for yourself what truth still hides in the dark. On May 15, 2024, two experienced mountain bikers named Maya Carter and Alex Thompson set out early on a remote section of the Pacific Crest Trail. Maya had spent many years riding challenging terrain throughout the West Coast forests. Her confidence came from years of navigating steep trails and rough terrain. Alex, a trained outdoor instructor, had guided groups through forests and across mountain paths in several states. Both bikers were fit, careful, and carried all necessary gear, including water, maps, first aid kits, and work radios. Their goal was to ride a rarely used stretch through dense woodland and juniper-covered hills. The first day went smoothly. They followed the trail downhill through the thick trees, enjoying the cool air and bright light filtering through the branches. They paused for a snack near a small stream and took photos of wildflowers. Late afternoon shadows grew long, but they pressed forward, wearing protective gear and checking their route often. The forest felt quiet, but safe. On the second day, the sky darkened unexpectedly. A cold wind kicked up, scattering leaves and rattling branches. Visibility dropped. They slowed down and continued in light rain. The trail became muddy, and the bikes often slipped. Yet they stayed together and pushed through until late afternoon, when they reached a rocky ravine with steep walls on one side. They set their bikes down by a large tree. Later that evening, hikers discovered the scene as they approached the ravine. They found two damaged bikes leaning against a rock. The frames were bent, one wheel torn from its axle, and the tires were shredded. Nearby lay a helmet soaked in mud and smeared with red. Torn pieces of clothing were scattered around, ripped open along seams and seams pulled apart. Searchers examined the ground nearby. They found enormous footprints pressed deeply into the soft soil. Each print was nearly twice the size of a human boot and pressed far deeper than would be expected from bike tires. The prints followed a long line into the brush and disappeared near crushed branches that looked snapped under force. The brush lay flattened and broken, as if something heavy had ripped through it. Several trees around the site showed deep scratch marks towering over 8 feet high. The bark had been gouged in clean strokes. No signs of bears were visible, no droppings, no claw fragments, and no typical tracks. Nothing matched known local animal behavior. The area felt silent and still. Hikers also discovered a phone among the torn gear. On its screen was a draft text message that was never sent. The words were simple, but chilling. Something's watching us. It's huge. There was no timestamp after that draft. The rest of the phone was wiped clean as if left in a hurry. Officials launched an extensive search effort, including rangers and forensic teams. They eventually recovered the bodies down the ravine. Both victims had suffered severe trauma to the torso and head. The official explanation was a fatal animal attack, blamed on wild bears. However, the size of footprints, height of scratch marks, and undisturbed gear raised doubts among rescuers and locals alike. Despite the official ruling, rumors began to spread of something far larger and free of gravity, something that stalked the dark trail silently. The damaged bikes and the shaking draft message became evidence in a story that people whispered about in nearby towns. The forest still feels unsettled, as if Maya and Alex left behind more questions than anyone could answer. The bodies were recovered with care and flown out by helicopter. They had been found side by side at the base of the rocky drop. Both showed signs of severe damage. Bones were broken in multiple places, and clothing had been torn beyond repair. One of the helmets had a large dent on the side. Authorities marked the area and sealed it off from public access. Tape was placed around trees, and patrols were sent out to keep people away. The bikes were moved to storage. Investigators took samples from the scratches on nearby bark and sent them for testing. Soil samples were also collected near the strange footprints. Nothing returned useful results. No hair was found, no blood, except from the victims. The broken branches looked bent from above, not snapped by hands or hooves. Their position showed something had moved through them in a way no forest creature would. When the news reached nearby towns, people began sharing their own quiet stories. Some recalled hearing odd noises in the woods late at night. Others spoke of trees swaying without wind or loud thuds from deep in the forest. A few even mentioned large shapes seen from a distance during hikes in earlier years. A small memorial was placed along the trail by friends and family. Flowers, photos, and candles were left. Hikers who passed by said the forest felt colder in that area. Some claimed the air became thick and the silence deeper the closer they came to the site. Most people walked faster as they passed it. Some turned back completely. The draft message on the phone was printed and included in the private investigation folder. Though the phone showed no outgoing signals, its internal clock showed the message was typed minutes before tracking stopped. This was the last piece of communication from either rider. The official file stated that both were lost to an unexpected wildlife encounter. Rangers held a press meeting to discourage rumors. They told the public it was a tragic case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. No mention was made of the size of the tracks or the height of the scratches. Photos were kept from public release. The search logs were later trimmed to show only basic details. Still, questions remained. No known bear in the area matched the force or movement patterns shown at the scene. None of the usual signs of feeding, bedding, or returning paths were present. The scratches reached above bear height, and the prints did not match claws or paws. A few months later, new warning signs were placed along the edge of that section of the trail. They mentioned falling rocks and unstable paths, but hikers knew those reasons did not match what had happened. Most chose other trails after reading about the case online. The story faded from headlines, but the memory stayed among those who read the reports and saw the damage firsthand. Whatever had crossed paths with those riders had not come from the usual forests, and it had not left quietly. On April 22, 2015, deep in the forests of Karelia near a small northern village, 4 officers were sent to check on strange radio failures that had been happening in the area. These were not new to their jobs. Each had served in the region for years. One was trained in field tracking. Another handled communication systems. The third had experience with wildlife emergencies. The last had just transferred from a nearby city post. Together they formed a solid team. Locals respected them and often said the group worked well in quiet and wild places. That morning they left early from the station. The weather was calm but cold. The forest ahead was thick with old trees and moss-covered paths. No roads reached far into the area, so they traveled on foot. The task was simple. A small relay tower in the forest had gone quiet for 2 nights. Villagers had also said their radios crackled with static, then went silent. The officers were told to check the equipment and report back. By midday, their last message came through. It was short and broke off before giving clear details. No words, just static, and then nothing. Hours passed. No updates followed. The base waited, thinking the forest had blocked the signal. By the next morning, a search team was called. It took 2 full days to find them, deep among tall pine trees, in a part of the forest where sunlight barely reached. The team came to a halt. In a wide circle between the trees, they saw something that made them freeze. All 4 officers were lying flat on the ground. Their arms were at their sides. Their faces were pressed into the earth. Their eyes were open wide, and their mouths slightly parted, but none of them looked like they had fought back. No blood, no wounds, no signs of fear frozen in place. It looked as though they had been placed there gently. Their weapons were nearby, not dropped in panic, but lined up beside each of them. The rifles were clean, no signs of use. Their gear was untouched. Radios were found with full batteries, but no new signals had been sent. One radio was still turned on. It gave off soft, crackling sounds that faded in and out. The sounds were not voices, just strange static with low hums. Above the clearing, several trees held something odd. Branches had been broken and twisted together, forming a strange shape that hung between the trunks like a woven net. It moved slightly in the air, though no wind touched it. The ground showed no tracks. The moss underfoot was soft, and the searchers found only one set of prints, those of the officers. Nothing else had walked into or out of that space. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The quiet was deep and heavy. The team took photos and called for backup. What had happened in that clearing could not be explained. The forest gave no clues, and the silence never left. The second team stayed near the site until morning. They placed lights around the clearing, but none of them felt comfortable. Even with equipment and radios working, the forest seemed to press in from every side. No wind touched the trees, and the air felt cold and still. No one could explain why everything seemed so heavy, like the place itself was holding its breath. Some officers walked the edges of the area searching for more signs. They found none. The prints remained the same. Only the ones left by the first 4 men showed in the moss. There were no other paths, no trails, no broken grass, no signs of wild animals. The strange shape hanging between the trees was taken down and packed for study. The branches were dry and bent tightly together in a pattern that looked as though it had been planned, not made by chance. There were no marks from rope or wire. Whatever made the pattern had used only hands or force. It held together without falling apart, like it had been placed there for a reason. The officers who saw it up close said it gave them a strange feeling, as if it should not be touched. Still, it was taken and labeled as evidence. Back at the village, people had already heard the news. Some said the woods had always been strange. A few old stories came back, tales of strange sounds at night, missing animals, and shapes seen between trees that were never clear. One man told others that some parts of the forest were better left alone. Many refused to return to the area, even in daylight. An official report was made later that week. It said the officers had died from a wild animal, possibly a bear, but the facts did not fit that idea. Bears do not arrange weapons. They do not lay people in circles or build shapes with branches, and they do not leave without leaving deep tracks. Still, the case was closed with no more questions. The bodies were taken back to the city. There were no signs of injury, no damage inside or out, no cuts, no broken bones, no swelling. Their faces were calm. The doctors could not find what had caused them to stop breathing. They looked like they had simply fallen asleep and never woke up. The radio that was found at the site was studied too. The sounds it made were recorded, but no one could explain the soft noise inside. It was not a voice, not music, just a low tone that moved in and out. After that, the area was marked as closed. New signs were placed to warn people of unstable ground, though no real danger had been found. Locals began calling the forest cursed. Travelers were told to avoid the path near the site. Even the search team did not go back. The trees remain. The net of branches is gone, but the place feels the same. Cold, quiet, waiting. On January 27, 2004, deep in the Canadian Rockies, 2 hikers named Eli Turner and Noah Baird began a multi-day trek through the mountain trails. Eli was a part-time nature guide from Alberta, used to long climbs and sudden weather shifts. Noah was a biology student visiting from Nova Scotia, interested in alpine ecosystems and cold weather survival. The two had met at a backcountry safety course and planned this trip months in advance. They carried emergency gear, snowshoes, a satellite phone, and layers of winter clothing. Their plan was to reach a high ridge and camp for 3 nights, taking notes on wildlife and winter patterns. At the same time, a ski patrol team worked in nearby areas, clearing avalanche zones and checking routes. Among them was a young patroller named Owen, who had just completed his 2nd winter season. Owen was cautious but brave, and had a sharp eye for unusual tracks and weather changes. That week, a strong blizzard warning was issued, and several groups were asked to delay their hikes. Eli and Noah had already moved into the deeper valleys by then, and were not seen again for several days. The storm arrived with force, pushing snow across the ridgelines and blocking trails. Patrol teams lost signal at several checkpoints. When the weather cleared slightly, Owen set out to search one of the more remote valleys. Near the edge of a narrow ravine, he noticed a strange path in the snow. It was a trail of large, half-melted impressions, longer and wider than a human step. The shapes ran in a single line toward a frozen creek, but there were no return tracks. They ended sharply at the icy edge. Close by, a torn backpack was found. Inside were supplies, a broken compass, and pieces of fur that did not match any known animals in the area. The bag was still partly zipped, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. No blood marked the snow, but the trees nearby had fresh scrapes at shoulder height. As Owen looked around, a deep growl echoed between the cliffs. The sound was not sharp like a wolf's or high like a cat's. It was deep and rough, carried by the wind. He turned but saw nothing in the thick trees above. Owen marked the area and called for help, but radio signals were weak. As the wind picked up, he backed away slowly. The growl stopped, but the sense of being watched stayed with him. He left a bright marker at the ravine and returned to the base. 2 days later, Eli and Noah returned from the woods. Their faces were pale, and they looked confused. Their jackets were torn, and their boots were worn down. They could not explain where they had been. Both said they remembered walking in snow, then standing near trees with something huge staring from behind the branches. That was all they could recall. The ski patrol returned early the next morning. They had not slept well, haunted by the sounds they had heard the day before. More snowfall had covered most of the ground, but parts of the strange tracks remained near the frozen creek. The shape of each print still looked too wide and long. They took more pictures and sent them to the Forest Service, who responded that no such pattern matched known wildlife. Later that afternoon, a rescue helicopter flew over the area searching for more signs. From above, nothing strange could be seen. The trees were thick, the snow deep, and the landscape seemed still. But the pilot noted an odd patch of flattened trees near the ravine, as if something heavy had pushed through them. When the patrol reached the spot on foot, they found broken branches lying in odd directions. It did not look natural. That same day, word came that 2 hikers had returned to a nearby ranger station. They were the same ones reported missing before the storm. They were weak, covered in frostbite, and missing parts of their gear. Their clothing was torn in strange ways, not from falls or scraping against rocks. They were taken to a hospital, and doctors said they were lucky to be alive. But neither could explain what had happened. When asked about the storm, both said they could not remember. They said they had walked for hours in the snow but could not say where or how they survived. When asked about the area near the ravine, they both became quiet. One of them said he saw a tall figure near the trees. He described glowing eyes and something dark that did not move like any animal he had ever known. The other man nodded but did not speak. The patrol brought in the torn backpack found earlier. Inside were bits of strange fur-like strands. Scientists were sent to study the fibers, but no public answer was ever given. Rangers said they were not from any local species. After that, the pack was stored away and no more news came about it. The case was closed quietly. Authorities called the hikers' survival a miracle and said they likely wandered during the blizzard and suffered memory loss from the cold. But those who had seen the prints and heard the sounds were not convinced. Some started talking to each other more often, sharing stories they had heard before but never believed. Over the next few weeks, more people avoided that stretch of the trail. Even experienced climbers took longer routes to stay away from the ravine. Maps were not changed, but signs went up warning of ice danger and falling rocks. Locals whispered other reasons. The forest remained still. No new reports came, but the cold seemed deeper near that frozen creek. Patrols went less often. Some said the snow there felt heavier, as if something old had passed through and left part of itself behind. On March 17, 2013, deep in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, a skilled survivalist named Eric Nolan set off on a solo journey. He had spent years teaching wilderness skills through books and videos. Eric was known for his calm nature and strong outdoor knowledge. He had trained in cold weather, wild terrain, and remote camping. His plan was to spend 2 weeks alone testing a new route for an upcoming training guide. He packed basic tools, a hand-drawn map, a compass, dried food, and a small tent. His last message before heading into the woods said he would check in once he returned. For the first several days, the weather stayed dry, and the trees were thick with green moss. He set up camp near a small stream and kept notes in a notebook he always carried. Eric was careful and had always followed a routine, but something began to change near the end of the first week. His notes became short and tense. One page talked about strange movements in the forest at night. He wrote that heavy steps circled his shelter. Each night the sound came closer but never showed itself. Then he heard deep growls, low and slow, that echoed far through the woods. His final camp was found weeks later by a ranger team. The tent was still up. His gear was undisturbed, but Eric was gone. A fallen log near the clearing hid his notebook. The last pages had jagged writing. One page showed a rough picture of a tall shape with long arms and wide shoulders, standing near trees. The lines looked rushed and uneven. His last note was just a short warning. It said something was watching him, that it stayed just out of view. It did not move like a normal animal. The ink on the page was smudged, and the words trailed off near the bottom. Around the campsite, the team found strange signs. Claw marks were high on the trunks of trees. The bark was peeled away in long strips reaching higher than any bear would reach. In a nearby field, grass had been pressed down in a loose spiral, as if something very large had moved in circles again and again. There were no prints leading into or away from the clearing, no broken branches, no sign of a struggle. His supplies were untouched, but Eric was missing. Search dogs were brought in, but they found nothing. Helicopters flew over the area, scanning the thick woods. No signal or body was ever recovered. The official report said it was likely exposure. Eric may have gotten lost or hurt, but those who read the notebook said it told a different story, and the spiral in the grass remained untouched, even after days of wind. The spiral in the field stayed unchanged, even after several search teams passed through the area. Each person noticed how the grass seemed pressed evenly, without signs of force or dragging. It looked smooth, as if something heavy had floated over it. Wildlife trackers examined the scene but could not explain it. No usual signs of animal feeding, bedding, or movement were found. The claw marks on the trees stretched across several trunks. Some were too far apart for any known predator. The bark was peeled in long lines, and some of it had fallen gently onto the ground. The search crews measured the marks and took samples, hoping to match them with claw shapes from common species. But no match was made. The fibers pulled from the scratched bark did not come from bears, cats, or wolves. The sample was stored, but the results were never shared with the public. The notebook was handled by forest officials and taken for further study. Experts reviewed the pages. They noticed the early writing was calm, neat, and steady, but each line became more uneven as the pages continued. The sketch of the figure showed a tall, wide frame with no details in the face, just two large circles for eyes. The figure stood next to trees that were labeled with height markings. The drawing placed the shape nearly 3 meters tall. The warning note at the end of the book gave everyone pause. It did not include dates. It did not say when the figure was last seen. The smudged words seemed to fade toward the edge of the paper, as if the message had been stopped halfway through. Some said the lines looked like they had been written while the hand was shaking or moving. The search ended after 9 days. No new signs were found, no sound recordings, no heat signatures, and no movement caught on camera traps set around the camp. Eric's gear was removed. His campsite was cleared, and markers were left at the edge of the trail for safety. The area was then closed for a few weeks due to unsafe weather conditions. Back in town, people spoke quietly about the loss. Eric had been careful. He always left plans. He had maps and tools. To vanish without any trace went against everything people knew about him. Friends said he had no health problems. He had never gotten lost before. No wild animals had been active in that part of the forest during that season. Some locals began sharing stories again. Old tales of shadows in the woods, shapes that stayed far but watched closely. A few hunters said they had felt uneasy while walking the same forest trails. Others claimed to have seen markings on trees that matched what the rangers had found. Months passed, and the forest grew quiet once more. But some said the air felt heavier near that part of the trail, and the story of the missing survivalist never faded from memory. The clearing remained untouched. The spiral never grew back, and the forest never gave anything back, not even a single piece of him. On July 22, 2019, the Myers family arrived at a quiet ridge in the Ozark Mountains for a week-long camping trip in their RV. James, a retired fireman, had planned the trip with his wife Claire, a school teacher, and their 2 kids, 14-year-old Mia and 10-year-old Dylan. They loved exploring hidden forest spots away from busy campgrounds. This place was far from town, with tall trees, narrow trails, and a perfect view of the stars. The RV was parked beside a clearing, just beyond a gravel road, with no other campers nearby. The air was clean and the woods were calm. The first few days were peaceful. The family hiked, cooked meals over a small fire pit, and played games before bedtime. Dylan collected leaves while Mia took photos with her phone. James taught them how to spot animal tracks in the dirt, and Claire read stories aloud at night. Their days ended quietly, with the sound of bugs and owls in the distance. On the 4th night, dark clouds rolled in, but the family stayed warm and dry inside the RV. Sometime after midnight, the stillness was broken. A loud crash echoed through the trees. James sat up quickly, and the others followed, startled and confused. The source of the noise was clear. A window on the right side of the RV had shattered. Glass covered the floor, and cold air rushed in. The flashlight revealed more than just the mess. On the window's edge, a large, rough handprint had smeared the broken glass. It was not shaped like a human's or any animal they recognized. The fingers were too long, and the palm was wide and covered in thick hair. Claire pulled the kids to the back of the RV while James checked the door and front windows. Outside, something moved quickly into the trees. It did not growl or roar, but made deep, heavy breathing sounds. The RV shook lightly, as if something had bumped into it. Then the noise stopped. Minutes passed with no more movement. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. When morning came, they saw the full damage. The metal frame around the broken window had long scratches, each mark sharp and deep. Some cuts bent the metal inward. Nothing had been taken from inside, but their things had been touched. Backpacks were unzipped, blankets pulled off the beds, and food containers opened. It looked as if something had searched, not stolen. Outside the RV, bushes were bent and small trees cracked along a path that led down the hill. No clear tracks were left in the dirt. Rangers later searched the area and said the damage might have been from a large animal, likely a bear. But one expert noted the angle of the scratches looked strange, almost deliberate. The Myers family left the same day, shaken and silent during the drive home. They had no plans to return. The Myers family reached home late in the evening, still quiet from the long drive. No one unpacked. The RV stayed parked with the window still broken and the scratches still visible. For the next few days, the house felt strange. The kids stayed in their rooms. Claire kept all the curtains closed. James called the park office once, asking if anything new had been found near the ridge. The answer was short. Nothing had changed. No new prints. No reports. No other visitors had gone near that area since their visit. A week passed before James fixed the damage on the RV. He replaced the glass and tried to cover the deep lines in the frame. But no matter how much he worked, the metal stayed bent. The scratches looked older now, like marks left from something that had not belonged. Claire stopped going outside at night. She said the backyard seemed too dark, even with the lights on. Mia deleted every photo from the trip. Dylan placed his nature book under his bed and never opened it again. They each began to act differently. James stopped planning hikes. He no longer looked at maps or talked about trails. Claire kept the kids home more often. She avoided news and ignored calls from friends asking about the trip. Dylan slept with the light on. Mia started waking up at night, saying she heard breathing outside her window. The trees around their house looked taller, even though they had not grown. One afternoon, a ranger visited their home. He had received the final report from the area and wanted to return a small bag the family had left behind. The bag was dirty but untouched. Inside was a flashlight and a notepad Mia had been using. On the last page, a drawing had been made. None of the family remembered making it. The shape on the paper was large and dark, with one long arm stretched forward. The face was missing, but two wide marks had been placed where eyes might go. The ranger did not stay long. He said the case was closed. He repeated that the damage must have come from an animal, but he could not say which one. The forest near the ridge had no signs of bears. The crushed brush had not matched elk or deer. No fur had been found. The only thing they had recovered was a strange, low growl on a recording made by another camper nearby. It was faint and hard to hear, but something about the sound did not feel right. Over time, the family moved on, but they never spoke of the ridge again. No more camping trips were planned. The RV was sold by the end of the year. The kids did not ask for another vacation in the woods. Even during clear nights, no one stood outside to look at the stars. The air near the trees stayed too quiet. Something had been close once, too close, and it had left its silence behind. On January 10th, 2022, two snowmobilers named Eric Anderson and Lena Svensson set out on a cold expedition across a frozen lake in the far north of Scandinavia. Both were experienced winter riders who guided adventure tourists through snow-covered forests each winter. Eric worked as a nature radio host and had a calm voice that fit icy nights. Lena was a wilderness instructor with sharp survival skills. They planned a 2-day route crossing frozen terrain and remote woodlands, carrying gear, maps, food, and satellite phones. The first day passed without incident. Clear skies provided good visibility, and the air was crisp. They cruised across the lake at midday and stopped near the tree line for a quick break. Lena checked the map while Eric sipped warm tea from a flask. Snow lay thick on the trees and their tracks looked crisp and clean. As evening approached, they returned to their camp area near the forest, set up their snowmobiles, and prepared dinner. Late into the night, a distant howl echoed across the frozen lake. It was low, chilling and clear, not sharp like a wolf's cry, but long and drawn out, a sound that made the hair on their arms stand up. They looked toward the forest's edge. With full moonlight on the ice, something moved there. A large silhouette drifted along the tree line. It stood taller than any moose and wider than any bear. They watched silently, unsure if the figure was an animal or something more. Eric reached for his radio. Lena looked around, but the machines that powered their trip failed. Both snowmobiles sputtered and died at once. No warnings, no clues. The lights dimmed and went out. Silence fell heavier than the snow. Gusts of wind carried snowflakes across the frozen surface, but no mechanical hum remained. They gave up trying to restart and began walking across the ice. The wind felt colder without engines, each step heavy with frost. After miles, the cold began to bite deeper. Their boots felt wet and vision blurred. The forest seemed distant, trees like silent sentinels watching their progress. When dawn neared, they spotted strange tracks in the ice. Large prints dipped deeply into frozen snow. Each print was far larger than a human foot and too wide for snowmobile treads. Those tracks led toward a dark cave entrance, its mouth covered by a thin layer of ice. The prints stopped at the mouth. There were no signs of excavation, no movement inside the icy opening. It remained dark, still, as if untouched for ages. The snow around it was flat, with no dragging marks or extra impressions. A soft wind swept across the lake, bringing only cold and quiet. By mid-morning, locals found the pair near the lake's edge. Both were naked, weak, and shivering. They could not explain how their gear disappeared or why they had no memory of the night before. The cave and tracks drew concern, but the snowmobilers could not recall the journey from the moment the machines died until they were found hours later. Rescuers took them to shelter, warmed them, and gave medical care. Their minds cleared slowly, but their memory stayed blank. The medical staff kept Eric and Lena under observation for the next 2 days. Their skin showed red patches from the cold, but no frostbite had taken hold. They were given warm food, clean clothes, and rest, but their memories of the night remained lost. When asked about the prints or the cave, both stared ahead, saying nothing useful. Doctors ran scans and found no head injuries or signs of trauma. Their condition confused the staff. Physically, they were stable, but something inside them seemed distant. Local authorities visited the lake with a tracking team and rescue dogs. The area where the cave had been seen was frozen over again. Ice had sealed the opening, and no new marks appeared. The large tracks were gone. Wind and snow had erased them. Still, the team noticed that the trees near the spot bent slightly away from the opening. Some bark had peeled away at odd angles as if exposed to great weight or pressure. No animal signs were found. No fur, no droppings, nothing common to the region. The lake remained silent. A small group of villagers shared quiet warnings. Some said they had heard strange howls before during deep winters. Others spoke of stories from grandparents about the forest hiding old things in its deepest parts, shapes that watched from hills, sounds that came during storms. Most had never taken the tales seriously, but after what happened, fewer people spoke with ease. Parents stopped letting their children play near the lake, even during daylight hours. Eric returned home after a week. He avoided the radio studio and took a break from hosting. His voice no longer carried the calm tone people remembered. He avoided long talks and stayed indoors. Lena chose to leave the town for a while. She turned down a new teaching job and moved to another region without snow. She stopped using social media and turned off her phone for months. Neither of them contacted each other again. The snowmobiles were recovered weeks later. Both machines were intact, with full fuel tanks and no signs of engine failure. Tools were still packed, undisturbed. Their gear, however, was never found. No gloves, jackets, boots, or bags remained. The snow around the resting site had already melted in spring, but the area still felt strange. Some of the ice had melted in odd lines, as if something had been dragged gently but left no real weight. Officials filed the report under cold exposure and confusion from weather conditions. They blamed engine trouble and panic, but rescue workers who saw the size of the prints and the quiet air near the cave did not believe that. Some said the ice held things better left untouched. Others said the howl that started it all still echoed sometimes late at night, far across the lake when no one else was listening. Eric and Lena never spoke publicly about that trip. The cave entrance disappeared with the thaw, but the silence around the lake stayed colder than before.